I woke up with a start, the sharp glow of my phone screen blinding me in the dark. My heart pounded in my chest. A flood of notifications flashed across the screen, each one more alarming than the last, alerts, warnings, and then the one that made my blood run cold, a charge of $50,000. My stomach twisted, and the coffee I'd drunk hours ago seemed to churn, threatening to rise. There was no way this could be right. It was still early, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Adam, my husband, was still in bed, his slow, deep breaths barely audible from across the room. I glanced at him, his chest rising and falling with the ease of someone who had no idea that their world was about to come crashing down. How could he? He had no idea what he'd just done. I tried to focus on the screen again, my fingers shaking as I swiped through the alert emails from my bank. The charges were absurd. First-class flights to Paris, designer clothes, luxury watches, items I knew I would never buy. Not on my salary. Not in this life. But who else could it be? Who else had access to my information? And why hadn't I noticed earlier? As the weight of what I was seeing sank in, the pieces slowly started to click into place. Adam, my charming, ambitious husband, who always seemed to talk his way out of everything, who'd never been good with money, who always seemed to have some grand plan in motion but never followed through, had finally gone too far. I sat there in the darkness of our bedroom, the only light coming from my phone, and it hit me, he had used my credit card information. The card I'd been using for a project at work. The dummy card that was tied to a fraud detection program. A smile spread across my face, one I didn't expect to form. He had no idea what he'd done. I calmly closed the app, set the phone down, and stared at Adam, who was still obliviously sleeping. He thought he'd gotten away with it. But what he didn't know was that every single transaction he'd made had been flagged. Every single one. His lavish spree across Europe? It was about to come back to bite him, hard. I reached for my phone again, dialing the number I'd known I'd have to call eventually. Maria. My lawyer and best friend. She answered on the first ring, sounding groggy, but instantly alert when I spoke. Maria, I need your help, I said, my voice steady, but underneath it, I felt a surge of both anger and exhilaration. Adam stole my credit card details. There was a long pause before Maria laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. Are you serious? What the hell is wrong with him? I'm serious. And I've got the proof. He's in for a rude awakening. I didn't feel the anger I expected to. What I felt instead was power. Power over the man who had manipulated me for years. Power over the person who thought he could steal from me and get away with it. I wasn't just going to get the money back. I was going to make him pay for every single thing he had done, every lie he'd told me. But for now, I needed to let him think he had won. The next few days felt like a strange, twisted game. I watched as Adam pranced around, oblivious, proudly showing off his new purchases, his new watches, his tailored suits, and the stories of Parisian nights he'd spent with friends. He bragged about the finest champagne he'd had and the expensive meals he'd devoured. But I could only think one thing: you don't even know what's coming for you. Each alert, each notification that came through my phone, filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't expected. I let him play his little game, basking in the false glory of his stolen riches. But I was playing the long game. The real game. What he didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated me. And I wasn't about to let him get away with it. When I finally looked at him one last time before the storm broke, I knew it would be worth every second of the wait. I was about to take everything from him, just like he had tried to take from me. And this time, he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. The next morning, I stared at Adam as he nonchalantly sipped his coffee, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. He was lounging in the kitchen, casually scrolling through his phone, the smug grin on his face still there from his so-called luxury vacation. I watched him, the sound of his laughter mingling with the clinking of his coffee mug, and all I could feel was a deep, icy calm. The world felt surreal in that moment, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. I couldn't help but wonder, how could he be so naive? How could he believe he was untouchable, so convinced that I would never catch on? But the thing about Adam was that he had always underestimated me. He thought he was the one pulling all the strings, the one with the plan, the one who could charm his way through anything. But now, the joke was on him. I wasn't just a passive spectator in this marriage, I had built this life alongside him, and if there was one thing I knew, it was how to stay 2 steps ahead. After I left the kitchen that morning, I found myself staring out the window, my mind racing. My fingers automatically went to the phone in my pocket, unlocking it with the same ease I'd always had. I opened up my banking app again and stared at the transactions scrolling down the screen. Each one was a reminder of his betrayal, each designer dress, each overpriced meal, each flight to a city that I would never see. But then, a sense of clarity washed over me. This was no longer just about the money. This was about something far bigger. This was about me reclaiming the power that had been taken from me for so long. By noon, I was in my office, pretending to work as if everything was normal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, but my mind was elsewhere, planning my next move. I had already started gathering evidence, screenshots of the charges, timestamps of the fraudulent purchases. Every transaction was logged. Every move Adam made was being tracked. And I wasn't just going to stop there. This wasn't just a case of petty theft, this was a full-blown act of betrayal, and I would make him face the consequences. I dialed Maria again, my mind racing as I thought of everything that had unfolded in the past 24 hours. When she picked up, I could hear the smile in her voice even before she said anything. Well. I knew you'd call. So, tell me, how's your little husband doing? I exhaled slowly. He's still playing the part, acting like nothing's wrong, flaunting his new toys. But Maria, this isn't just about money anymore. This is about me taking back control. About me showing him who's really in charge here. She chuckled. I like it. I've got your back. You just tell me what you need. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. I need to make sure he doesn't see this coming. I need him to think he's winning, think he's untouchable. The more confident he is, the better. I want him to dig his own grave. And when he's at the bottom, that's when we make our move. I hung up the phone and looked at the calendar on my desk. I marked the date. It was only a matter of time before Adam would get sloppy, and I would be there, ready to catch him. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let him off easy. The days passed in a strange blur, Adam getting more comfortable with each passing moment, bragging about his trip like it was some sort of triumph, while I watched him with quiet, almost eerie patience. The more he reveled in his stolen luxury, the more I felt the weight of satisfaction grow inside me. Each time I received another notification about his spending, another extravagant dinner, another luxury watch, it felt like a little victory for me. It was like I was building a case against him without him even knowing it. I knew the authorities were watching, and every time I looked at my phone, every time a new alert came through, I could feel it tightening like a noose around his neck. He had no idea how deep he was in, no clue that everything he thought was a gift was about to turn into his worst nightmare. That afternoon, while he was off doing God knows what, I took a moment to breathe. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one who had blindly trusted a man who'd never given her the same. No, that woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned, painfully so, that trust is earned, not given. I could feel the power surging within me, a power that I hadn't allowed myself to tap into for years. But now? Now, it was unstoppable. Adam had no idea who he was really messing with. It was only a matter of time before he'd realize that he'd crossed the line, and when he did, it would be too late. He would wish he had never touched my life, never taken what didn't belong to him. But for now, I let him have his fun. I let him believe he was winning. The trap had already been set, and all I had to do was wait for him to walk right into it. It was the third day since I'd first seen the notifications, and Adam still had no clue that his world was crumbling beneath him. He was more smug than ever, parading around the house, showing off his latest acquisitions like a dog with a new bone. His laughter filled the air as he described his week in Paris, the luxury he'd indulged in, the clubs, the dinners, the expensive shopping sprees. Each word, every detail, grated on my nerves, but I held it in. I had to, this was part of the plan. Let him think he was winning. Let him feel untouchable. That evening, as he lounged on the couch, flipping through some fashion magazine, I watched him carefully. He had changed, there was an air of arrogance about him now. He spoke with a certain swagger, almost as if he had won the lottery. His eyes sparkled with that familiar look of self-satisfaction. But I knew what was coming, and he had no idea. I turned my attention to the phone in my hand. It buzzed again, another alert about a purchase in Europe, more high-end clothing, another round of drinks at a five-star bar. Each charge was a reminder of the betrayal. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a waste of energy. What I felt now was cold, calculated determination. The next step in my plan had been set in motion. I'd contacted the authorities, and Agent Keller had been assigned to the case. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he had already assured me that things were moving along smoothly. Every purchase Adam made was being tracked. He thought he was playing the game, but in reality, he was setting himself up for a fall. Adam looked up from his magazine and caught my gaze for a moment. There was something in his eyes, a hint of confusion. He hadn't noticed how quiet I'd become, how I'd been watching him more intently. But now, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was starting to question me. "What's going on with you?" he asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the underlying edge to it. "You've been so distant lately. Are you still upset about the trip?" I smiled at him, a slow, almost imperceptible grin that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Adam, I'm not upset," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" he pressed, his brow furrowing as he tossed the magazine aside and leaned forward. "About how things are supposed to work in a marriage," I replied, not looking at him, but instead, focusing on the glass in my hand. "How trust is supposed to be the foundation of everything. How, when you love someone, you don't betray them." There was a brief silence, and I could feel his tension rising, his pulse quickening as he started to piece it together. I could see it in his eyes, the realization beginning to form. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could speak. "Tell me, Adam," I said, my voice soft but firm, "what exactly did you think was going to happen when you took my credit card information?" His face drained of color in an instant, and for the first time since this all began, I saw the real Adam, the one who had no control, the one who was scrambling to keep up appearances. His eyes darted around the room, searching for some escape, but there was none. I didn't mean for this to get out of hand," he stammered, his confidence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. I thought I could just get away with it." "Get away with it?" I repeated, my voice rising just slightly. "You thought you could steal from me, spend my money like it was yours, and I wouldn't find out? You really think I'm that stupid?" He stood up suddenly, pacing back and forth, his hands running through his hair, his mind racing. "Sarah, please, just listen, this isn't what it looks like." I cut him off again, this time more forcefully. "No, Adam. It's exactly what it looks like. You thought I wouldn't catch on. You thought you could slip away with tens of thousands of dollars while I stayed here, oblivious. But here's the thing, you're not as clever as you think you are. Every single transaction you made was flagged. Every flight, every purchase, every hotel. And now it's all being investigated." The look on his face was priceless. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words, but none came. I could hear the panic starting to creep into his voice. "Sarah, please," he begged, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted a taste of something more, something better. You know how hard I've been trying to, but you never understand. You never let me just enjoy myself. I thought. You thought what? That I wouldn't notice? I interrupted, standing up now, my eyes narrowing. That I wouldn't catch you the moment you made your move? You've been lying to me for years, Adam. But this? This is the last straw. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of his actions sank in. I could almost feel the panic seeping out of him, and for a split second, I wondered if he truly realized how deep he was in. But then, that thought was gone, replaced by the knowledge that he would never get out of this one. Not this time. I walked over to my desk, pulling out the folder that held all the evidence. The receipts, the dates, the records of everything. I slid it across the table toward him, and he glanced at it, his eyes widening as he recognized the implications. Every single one of these charges has been reported, I said coldly. And every single one of them is going to come back to you. You thought you were being clever, but you've made a rookie mistake, Adam. You've sealed your fate. Adam took a step back, shaking his head. No, no, no. This can't be happening. You're lying, Sarah. You're lying, right? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for my phone and dialed the number of Agent Keller. The sound of the ringing filled the silence in the room, and I could feel Adam's eyes burning into me as he realized there was no escape. He was trapped. And I had him right where I wanted him. Agent Keller, it's me. I think it's time we move forward, I said into the phone, my voice steady, resolute. As I hung up, I turned to face Adam, who now looked utterly defeated. The man who had thought he could play me had finally realized the truth. He was the one who had been played all along. The moment I hung up the phone, a heavy silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Adam was standing there, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. But it was too late for explanations, too late for apologies. This wasn't just a minor mistake anymore, this was a betrayal so deep, so deliberate, that there was no way to cover it up with a few empty words. I could feel the tension radiating off of him as he took an unsteady step backward, like he was trying to find some way out, some angle to escape. But there was no escape. He had dug this hole for himself, and now it was time to bury him in it. He was standing there in his designer clothes, looking out of place, like a man who had everything but, in reality, had nothing. He had nothing but lies and deceit, and soon, he would have nothing left at all. I don't know what you think you're doing, Sarah, Adam said, his voice trembling now, no longer the confident, arrogant tone he'd worn for the past few days. You can't just do this. You can't. I can, Adam, I cut him off, my voice colder than I ever imagined it could be. I can do whatever I want, because you made a choice. A choice that's going to ruin you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it now. His face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks as the reality of his situation finally sank in. It was like watching a man realize he was drowning, the panic and desperation growing in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was choking on the guilt, choking on the truth that had finally caught up with him. I walked towards him slowly, deliberately, each step calculated. This was it. The moment where everything changed. You think you can steal from me, lie to me, and get away with it? After everything we've been through? You have no idea who you've been messing with. I stopped just in front of him, looking directly into his eyes, holding his gaze as if to remind him that this was the last time he would ever get away with anything. You've been lying to me for years, Adam. All those excuses about why you couldn't hold a job, all the business ventures that never went anywhere. I've seen through all of it. But this? This is something you can't talk your way out of. He opened his mouth again, but the words didn't come out. He was a broken man now, his entire facade crumbling before me. I could see him mentally scrambling, trying to figure out a way to salvage something, anything, but he was already too deep in. His shoulders slumped, and I saw the defeat in his eyes. For the first time, I wasn't just looking at my husband. I was looking at a man who had no idea how to get out of the mess he'd created. Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. The sound of it made Adam jump, his head whipping towards the door, his panic palpable. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who was on the other side. Sarah, please, let's just talk about this, Adam pleaded, his voice breaking as he stepped forward. We can fix this. I'll give it all back. I held up my hand, cutting him off. It's too late for that. I walked toward the door without looking back. Adam stood frozen in the middle of the room, his eyes locked on me, his expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. I opened the door to reveal Agent Keller, flanked by 2 officers. The sight of them was like a final death sentence to Adam's delusions. His eyes widened, and I could see his throat constrict as he realized that the moment he had been dreading had arrived. Mr. Miller, Agent Keller said, his voice calm but with an unmistakable authority. We're here to discuss your fraudulent activities. You're under investigation for credit card fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of a financial account. Adam's face went from pale to white as a ghost. He stumbled backward, his body shaking, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. This is a mistake. You've got the wrong guy. Sarah, you have to. But his voice faltered when he saw my expression. There was no sympathy in my eyes. There was no empathy. There was just cold, unshakable resolve. I'm sorry, Adam, but this is the end, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that I knew would stay with him for the rest of his life. One of the officers stepped forward, placing a hand on Adam's shoulder. Sir, we'll need you to come with us, he said firmly. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Adam's mouth opened and closed, his mind still racing for an out, for some way to undo the damage he had caused. But it was no use. The jig was up. He looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, but I just stood there, unmoving, my gaze fixed on him. I never thought it would come to this, Adam muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I thought we had something. I thought we were, in this together. We were never in this together, Adam, I said quietly. You were always on your own. You just didn't realize it until now. As the officers led him out the door, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The man I had once loved was now just a memory, his betrayal exposed, his life unspooling at the seams. The life I had built with him was now nothing more than shattered illusions. And as the door closed behind him, I felt the weight of it all lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was free. Free of the lies, free of the deceit, and free to live my life without the shadow of his betrayal looming over me. It was over. And I had won. The days following Adam's arrest felt like a strange kind of liberation. The house, once filled with tension and hidden secrets, now stood eerily quiet. No more lies, no more false promises, no more pretending. It was just me, finally free from the weight of a marriage that had suffocated me for far too long. The man I thought I loved was gone, and in his place was the unmistakable scent of relief, the kind of relief that only comes when you finally confront the truth, no matter how ugly it may be. In the weeks that followed, I watched as Adam's world unraveled. His carefully curated life of luxury had come crashing down. The designer suits, the flashy watches, the high-end meals, none of it mattered now. His reputation had been shattered. Word spread quickly, as it always does, and the once beloved husband became the subject of whispered gossip and scorn. I didn't feel bad for him. Not even a little bit. I heard from mutual friends that he was struggling. Unable to find work, unable to rebuild the facade he had spent so long constructing. The woman he'd been seeing, the one I'd suspected was part of his charade, vanished the moment she learned of the fraud charges. She wasn't interested in a man who had nothing left to offer. Not when his wealth was a lie, a mirage he'd built with my trust and his deceit. One evening, as I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting another business email, but when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was Adam. For a moment, I just stared at the phone, the number familiar but somehow distant now. It felt like a lifetime ago that I'd answered his calls without a second thought. I hesitated, then tapped the screen, the decision made in an instant. I didn't owe him any more explanations. No more apologies. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought you would understand. I thought you would forgive me." I felt a strange mixture of emotions in that moment. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. After all, he was now facing the consequences of his own choices, the very ones that had ruined everything between us. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the way he had stolen from me without a second thought, and that part of me hardened. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Adam," I said, my voice firm. "Sorry doesn't bring back what you took from me. It doesn't take away the years I wasted, believing in you, trusting you. I thought you loved me," he said, his voice cracking, a trace of desperation creeping in. "I did," I replied quietly. "I loved the person I thought you were. But that person doesn't exist. Not anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear him trying to process my words, trying to find a way to spin it, to make it seem like this was all just a misunderstanding. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. "Goodbye, Adam," I said, cutting him off before he could say anything else. "I'm done with you." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. It wasn't anger I felt, or bitterness, it was just peace. It was the peace that came from knowing that I had finally taken control of my life. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his excuses. What I needed was to move forward, to reclaim my future. I spent the following days sorting through the mess of my life, finding pieces of myself that had been lost along the way. I redecorated the apartment, making it truly mine, bright colors, personal touches, things that made me feel whole again. I took a solo trip to the coast, something I had dreamed about for years but never had the chance to do. And for the first time, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else. The divorce papers came through a week later, the final step in letting go. I held them in my hands for a moment, just staring at the words, feeling the weight of it all settle in. But then, I folded them, tucked them into a drawer, and let out a long breath. It was over. The last chapter of my life with Adam had been written, and I was ready to turn the page. I met up with Maria for lunch one afternoon, the first time we had caught up since everything had fallen apart. Over mimosas and eggs Benedict, she asked the question I had been waiting to hear. "So, what's next for you?" I smiled, a real smile this time. "I'm focusing on myself. I'm building a life that's mine, without any of the lies or the baggage. It's time to do things on my terms." Maria raised her glass. "To new beginnings, then. To never settling for less than I deserve," I said, clinking my glass with hers. The months passed, and I settled into my new routine. I threw myself into work, making strides in my career, taking on projects that excited me. I met new people, made new connections, and slowly, I realized that I was happier than I had been in a long time. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was whole on my own. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about Adam. He had moved back in with his parents, his credit ruined, and his life in shambles. But I didn't care. He wasn't my problem anymore. The man I had once called my husband was nothing more than a distant memory now, a lesson learned the hard way. And one day, as I sat on my balcony, watching the city come to life below, I realized that I had everything I needed right there. The freedom. The clarity. The strength I had gained through everything I had endured. The door had closed on that chapter, and a new one had begun. And this time, it was my story. My life. No more compromises, no more lies, just the future I had always deserved. To me. To new beginnings. And to the endless possibilities ahead.